All right. So we've talked about what climate change is. It is specifically anthropogenic climate change is the climate system's response to human activity. But that begs another question. Isn't it just weather? Right? Isn't climate change just weather? Well, the answer is no. And the reason why is because weather and climate are two different things. When we talk about weather, we're talking about moment to moment. When we talk about climate, we're talking about averages. So let's delve in and talk about that. So, is this weather? Well, first off, climate and weather are not the same thing. Weather deals with the instantaneous condition of the atmosphere at a given time and location. When we talk about weather, we're actually talking about what's happening at a single location at a single moment. And this varies greatly from moment to moment and from place to place. Um, I always like to tell people that the weather conditions in downtown San Jose are different than the weather conditions in Cupertino, are different than the weather conditions in Mountain View, are different than the weather conditions in Gilroy. You can change location, and that's going to change your weather conditions. Now, in many cases, those weather conditions might not vary much, but it's still worth noting that they are different, even if they're just slightly different. Um, and then the other thing is that weather is constantly changing. You could be outside on a nice sunny day, and then suddenly, over a period of just a few minutes, it can get cloudy. Maybe it starts raining. Maybe it gets cold. Maybe a cold front blows through and the temperature drops. Those changes that happen in our weather happen relatively quickly. And so when we talk about changes in weather, we're talking about really, really quick moment to moment changes. That's different from climate. When we talk about climate, we're talking about what's normal for a location. We're talking about what the normal weather for a location is. Um, Weather changes rapidly, climate changes slowly. And that's one of the concerning things about modern climate change is that the climate now is changing relatively rapidly. We're seeing warming happening over years to decades rather than centuries to millennia, which is what it normally does. But climate change deals with what's normal. So, for example, if you live in the Bay Area, so I'm using the Bay Area for an example because this class is based out of a school in the Bay Area. So, if you live in the Bay Area, summer times are typically dry, winter times are typically wet, right? That's usually how our weather is like. That's usually what our normal weather is. Normally during the summertime, it's warm and dry. And so you don't see raincoats or boots or you don't see umbrellas out or anything like that because we don't use them in the summertime because it's not cold and it's not raining. Wintertime is typically cold and rainy, right? And so you can walk into a Target in January and find umbrellas for sale or raincoats for sale or so on because it's wet during that time of year, right? That's um and those two things, those two facts, summer being warm and dry, winter being cool and wet, those two facts define our climate. Those two facts define our climate. So are parts of our climate. It shouldn't just say that they define our climate. There's so much more to our climate than just that. Um, And when we talk about climate change, we're talking about how those things are changing. Summers are getting warmer, winters are getting drier. Those normals, those things that are normal are changing. And that's how we define climate. So weather varies from place to place. I took this from Wonder Map. This is from the Weather Underground. And this just shows temperature and wind. Temperature is the number that's in the middle of that circle. The sticks that point out of those circles, those tell us wind direction. Don't get overwhelmed with it. Mostly just focus on the numbers. And as you can tell, the numbers vary from location to location in the Bay Area. Climate, on the other hand, is something like this. This shows us average precipitation for different locations of the continental United States. And how these change over time, that's what we talk about when we talk about climate change. So, just really quickly, talking about climate really quickly. If you notice, I mean, if I were to explain this map really quickly, I would say the western half of the United States, that's the left half. In this class, left is always going to be on, or sorry, west is always going to be on the left. East is always going to be on the right. North is always going to be on the top. South is always going to be on the bottom. All right. But there is a very noticeable east to west divide. The eastern United States has a lot more blue and green. Those represent wetter averages, more rainfall. And if you've ever been to the East Coast during the summertime, it's nice and green. Meanwhile, the western end of the United States is a lot drier. There's a lot of red, yellow, brown. I mean, with some exceptions, mainly mountains such as the Cascades, the coastal ranges, the Olympic Mountains, the Cascades, the Sierra Nevada, the coastal range. Really, with these exceptions, the western United States is significantly drier. And so that just tells you a little bit about climate. It's a lot wetter on the east coast of the United States. It's a lot drier on the west coast of the United States. Again, those are just elements of our climate. So just a quick summary. Weather represents short-term conditions. Climate represents long-term averages. Weather represents what is occurring at a given moment in the atmosphere. And one thing I should say really quickly, weather is more than just temperature. Very common misconception that students will make is they'll say that weather is the temperature outside. Weather is not just temperature. Weather is all kinds of stuff. Weather includes rainfall. Weather includes wind. Weather includes cloud cover. So there's all kinds of different things when talking about weather. Climate is what you expect to occur. Weather is what is occurring. Climate is what you would expect to occur. Weather changes quickly. Climate changes slowly. Weather can vary greatly over a small area. Climate varies over a larger region. Weather changes. Weather is very instantaneous. Climate is very gradual. So those are just some of the few differences between weather and climate. And then, is climate change weather? No. And the reason why is because climate change is still dealing with how our normal is changing. So going back to this map. This map shows us what's normal. When we talk about climate change, we're talking about how this changes. We're talking about how average precipitation changes. Some places are getting wetter. Some places are getting drier. Now that change takes time. It takes years to decades to centuries. Weather takes seconds to change. You can go from nice and sunny to downpours in just a matter of minutes in some parts of the world, which is kind of cool to think about. So that's it about the difference between weather and climate. Next, we're going to talk about the scientific method and how you are actually a good scientist. So I'll see you for that later.